playoff history, and they are on to the AFC Championship game. It's the first time since 2009 season that neither Brady nor Rodgers will be on Championship Sunday. Repeat Super Bowl champion drought now reaches 17 years with Brady heading out. Bengals in their first AFC Championship game since 1988. So let's get our foremost experts in NFL coverage on the show here. Pete Prisco and Brady Quinn. Brady and I are the same age, so is Amanda. We feel like we've seen a lot, but nothing close to what Pete has seen. Pete, put this into perspective for us, what we just saw yesterday.
Well, it was the greatest football weekend we've ever seen, I think, from that standpoint. Competitive games, last-second field goals, controversy, bad officiating at times, strange decisions by coaches. It had it all, and it had the greatest game between two quarterbacks that we've ever seen in the postseason with so much on the line. Watching Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes play against each other was outstanding theater. And when you go back and look at what happened, 13 seconds to go get a tying field goal, and it happened. That's amazing. It was one of the greatest weekends, if not the greatest weekend. I think it was the greatest weekend of playoff football. And that Bills-Chiefs game is arguably the greatest game ever played.
Well, if Father Time, Pete Prisco, is going to go and say it's the greatest that he's ever seen, it's easier for me, who's much younger, to say, yeah, it was also the greatest weekend I've ever seen of playoff football in NFL history. And I think that Chiefs-Bills game really capping it off, it says everything that needs to be said. Now, granted, we can go back and we can question some of the coaching decisions and the execution, some of the officiating at times over this entire weekend. The reality is the margin of victory was the smallest we've ever seen between divisional games, at least as far as having 4 games that we're looking at. But once again, there's going to be that question of the overtime rules, and you're going to hear a debate as to whether or not a team should have the opportunity to have a rebuttal or an additional possession, even if a team like the Kansas City Chiefs drives down the field and scores a touchdown to seal it. Everyone seems to want to see more football when they've got something great like what we saw with the Bills and Chiefs. They don't want it to end, and they want Josh Allen to have another chance. That's not how the rules are set up, and I don't really have a problem with it, to be quite honest with you.
And I don't think Pete does either, judging from his social media last night. Pete, what do you think of the overtime rules?
I mean, defense wins championships, but it can't win in overtime? I mean, give me a break. They did change the overtime rule. Now you have to go score a touchdown. It's not a field goal anymore. They changed that. People forget that. Doesn't defense matter? There's 11 guys on that side of the ball playing that get paid just like the offensive guys do. Stop somebody. Doesn't come down to a coin flip, and I think it's an insult to the rest of the game. Sure, they got the ball first. Stop them. Make a play. You'll get the ball, or maybe even make a play where you get a pick six or force a fumble and return it for a touchdown. There are other ways to win the game. I hate the people who scream and yell about change the rules, change the rules. The rules weren't changed. You even forget the touchdown, you'll get the ball. You'll have your chance.
Well, what about just winning it in regulation? Why not just squib kick where you're most assuredly going to take more time off the clock? And look, maybe the Kansas City Chiefs still figure out a way of getting a field goal and taking it into overtime. But the reality is the Buffalo Bills had their chances. They had their opportunities. We tend to forget that Butker in that game, he missed a field goal and a PAT. Really, Kansas City should have been up by more than that. If we're going to look at in the grand scheme of the kicking game, this entire playoff weekend where everyone pretty much was lights out for the most part, Butker probably had the most disappointing performance, even though he obviously ended up hitting a field goal to send him into overtime. So the reality is I don't have a problem with it. It does put a lot of pressure, it seems like, on that coin toss, and it's kind of the luck of the draw. And so much similar to the Kansas City Chiefs, who were on the wrong end of this back when they got beat by the New England Patriots, who ended up going on to the Super Bowl there in Arrowhead. Now they experience the other side of this. They win the coin toss, they take the football, and they drive down the field for the touchdown to end it and to go to another AFC Championship game.
Brady, you mentioned how the Bills handled that last 13 seconds, and I think it began with the kick into the end zone. I think Tony Romo even mentioned it when it happened, that maybe that's not the right thing to do, to give Mahomes that extra time. Between the Bills and that last 13 seconds and what the Bucs allowed Cooper Kupp to do, who handled it worse at the end of regulation?
The Bucs, hands down the Bucs. Okay, I mean let's just put it this way. Let me set things up for you as far as that final drive between the Rams and the Bucks. All right, you've got a tie score, and really at that point, the Rams, after a sack on their initial play, are now in 2nd and 11, 35 seconds, no timeouts. So what do? Well, you like to double Cooper Kupp instead of leaving him man-to-man coverage. The two things you're fighting on a 2-minute drive, time and distance. And as you can see, he's singled up on Sean Murphy-Bunting, who falls down. Where's the help? You should be bracketing him. He's the toughest guy to cover. And then finally, this last play, that was blitz 0, an all-out blitz. So you're forcing the football out, yeah, but you've got Antoine Winfield Jr. one-on-one with the most productive receiver in the NFL. It's bad scheme. It was a bad decision by Todd Bowles on both of those particular plays to try to sit there and force the football out and pressure him instead of rushing 3, dropping 8, getting more guys with eyes on Matt Stafford and a couple of guys trying to defend Cooper Kupp. It was as hard to cover as anyone in the NFL. I hated what they did down the stretch. I don't want to take anything away from what the Rams did or Matt Stafford did, but at the end of the day, Cooper Kupp versus safety? Yeah. I think every quarterback in the NFL and every guy who's a backup sitting on the bench, and then the other guy who's a third string, maybe on practice squad or holding a clipboard with a headset, they're all making that same decision, that same throw too.
Yeah, that was bad. 0 blitz when you don't have to try and knock him out of field goal range. It made no sense. But I have one thing to say. 13 seconds. 13 seconds, Brady. All they had to do was stop them. They win the game. If the Rams don't hit that shot, they go to overtime. The game was Buffalo's game. It was in their hands. All they have to do is stop Patrick Mahomes. 13 seconds. That's it. 13. You let him go get the tying field goal. You deserve to lose the game because your number 1 ranked defense was terrible in the fourth quarter, and it was terrible on that final drive. That was awful and far worse than what the Bucs did.
Pete, do you agree with what they did, kicking the ball into the end zone and not swimming it and having them take a few seconds off the clock?
No, there's a couple things you could have done. You could have squibbed it, or you could have done the pooch kick, the high, make them call fair catch at like the 10-yard line. Doesn't eat up any clock, but it puts them back further than where they were. There were other options there. And, I was talking to a guy in the league this week. They said if they'd kicked off and they had ripped the kick, then everybody would question them about that. Of course you would have. But the fact is they didn't run any time off the clock, nor did they pin him back in deeper than what they could have.
It's called a mortar kick, Pete. That's usually the objective there is you try to kick the ball high but in play to force them to have to return the football. You rally up, make a tackle. But again, we can always look back in hindsight, 2020. I would have squibbed it. I think that made the most sense. But you do always run the risk of an up man catching the football. And so, yeah, you might get a little bit of time off the clock. But at the same time, you might be giving up a lot of field position. And that's always a concern, too, in that instance. So I understand the point of, hey, it's a tie ball game. You don't need to do all that. As far as giving up the game-winning field goal to the LA Rams. But the one guy you couldn't allow beat you let beat you in Cooper Kupp. Like, he's the one guy, and you let him in consecutive plays beat you, and you didn't even try to put 2 guys on him. To me, that's as boneheaded as it gets.
Well, let's get to the Tom Brady reports today. And we heard Jason Lockenfora on with us earlier today saying it's very likely that was the last we've seen of Tom Brady in the NFL. Brady, what do you think we're going to see from Tom's camp over the next several weeks?
I heard from some people within the organization that there was a lot of people who are coming to the game that wouldn't normally be coming to a playoff game, at least one that's not, an NFC championship game or back in the day an AFC championship game or going to a Super Bowl. And it led many to believe that this indeed could be his final game that he's played in the NFL. There's a lot of things that he's contemplating. I know one of the things that was discussed was potentially the fact that he's under contract for another season. And he's the type of man that says, hey, when I make an agreement, when I put something down on paper like that, I want to own up to it. But I also think, he didn't outright say it, much like Aaron Rodgers. But at the same time, he's probably wondering, too, if they can continue to sign everyone back like they tried to run it back after last year's Super Bowl win. It's easier said than done after you win a Super Bowl. It's a little tougher when you don't even make it to the NFC Championship game. So they've got a lot of cap decisions and decisions they need to make as to whether or not they're going to try to build back up for one more run because Bruce Arians is coming back, or whether or not they're going to try to rebuild.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where family is pulling him away from the game. I think if it was up to him, strictly up to him, he'd come back and finish that last year on the contract and try and play because he's still playing at a high level. But when you look at it from a family standpoint, they've probably sacrificed a ton, and Brady knows, having played the position, there's a lot that goes into it, and having a family at times can put a real strain on it. So he's given up a lot of his life to the NFL. And it wouldn't shock me to see him walk away, but I also wouldn't be shocked, like Brady said, to see him say, you know what, I want to come back one more year. But when you look at the Bucs and their situation, they have cap issues, and you also have guys that are unrestricted free agents like Chris Godwin, who's an important, as we saw on Sunday, part of that offense. So there's a tough decision. I think ultimately he will walk away, but I think it's going to be more of a family decision than his.
And what about Aaron Rodgers? He's 6.5 years younger, has more football to play, we think, but has shown signs that he might be willing to walk away. He's married now. Maybe he's starting a family as well. What do you see happening, Pete, with Aaron Rodgers this offseason?
Well, I think he doesn't want to be part of it, a total rebuild, which he said. And if you look at their cap situation, it is awful. I mean, it is really bad. But you can get rid of some guys to free up cap room. I'll start. Zadarius Smith, see ya. Preston Smith, see ya. Then you could restructure some contracts. Adrian Amos, who's played really well for him, but he's got a big number. You probably restructure that one. Try and, get the cap number down. You have to make a decision on Bakhtiari and Billy Turner, which one goes and which one stays. Can you restructure any of those deals? So I think you can get the cap manageable. It's not going to be a great situation, but the key becomes, what does Devontae Adams do? And how do you fit him in? And how do you make sure he's on the roster? I think if they can find a way to get Adams back in, I think then maybe there's a chance Rodgers comes back. But if it's a total rebuild, he's out of there. Either he retires or he forces himself out with a trade.
Did I miss something? I mean, I don't subscribe to Us Weekly, so maybe Chris Hassel does. I didn't think Aaron Rodgers and Shailene Woodley were married. I thought they were maybe engaged at some point, but even that, there's some speculation as to how that relationship's going. So I'm not really sure where Hassel is going with that portion of it. Here's what I think is going to end up playing out this offseason. And Aaron, was very upfront about what he foresees is in his future. And I think it's as Chris Hassel's Googling right now whether or not Aaron Rodgers is married. The reality is this. You've got the Packers, who, as Pete elaborately laid out, they have a lot of decisions to make on their salary cap and how they can make space, who they're going to bring back. Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to be a part of that. And he still hasn't probably forgotten the fact that they drafted Jordan Love. Eventually, they've got to move on to that draft pick. There's probably no better time if you're the Packers to try to rebuild. He's most likely going to be the MVP, which is the MVP in back-to-back years. You could still trade him to a team that maybe he wants to go to, maybe one that's, around the Rocky Mountains there in Denver, that would give you some draft capital in exchange for him, and you don't have to play him necessarily because he's not in your same conference. So there's a lot of things that I think are up in the air, but I think this is an offseason that you're probably going to see Aaron Rodgers move on and played his last game with the Green Bay Packers, and he's going to look for a place that can immediately compete and give him a shot. And Denver, to me, seems to be that place, considering they've done it before with Peyton Manning. They're interviewing Nathaniel Hackett potentially to be the next head coach, which is now his offensive coordinator. And even if they went with a head coach like Dan Quinn, there's a thought out there that Luke Getsy, who's the quarterback coach with the Green Bay Packers, was interviewed as the head coaching job, potentially not only to get that job, but if he doesn't, to be the offensive coordinator to lure Aaron Rodgers from Green Bay if Dan Quinn was then the head coach. So a lot of things in the work for Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, but also keep in mind a team like the Denver Broncos.
No, I just assumed they were married by now because they've been engaged so long. But no, you're right. I need to subscribe to Us Weekly.
Apparently so.
Yeah. Why did I even bring it up? I've only brought it up because Pete mentioned the family circumstances. All right, guys. Thanks for the time here. Looking forward to Championship Sunday. The guys from inside the NFL are going to recap the incredible weekend we just saw in the divisional and look ahead to Championship Sunday. New episode 9:30 Eastern on Tuesday, exclusively on Paramount+.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.